Here on the screen. Uh, Okay. Okay. So if you remember last time, we finished with just before puberty talking about industry versus inferiority within Erickson's model. And just as a reminder, because it has been a week since we've started this topic, I'm presenting Erickson as, for example, industry and inferiority are kind of two dichotic categories. But what I would like you to kind of keep in mind is that we're all somewhere in between each of these two dynamics. Okay. And so we hope to be kind of more on the left side of the scale, but that doesn't always happen. And one thing that I didn't express last Wednesday, which I think is important, is that just because if you had a difficult time during one of these developmental phases, I often get asked, well, can you pick that up somewhere else or develop that at some other period of life? The answer is yes. These are not static and they're not fixed. What it does mean is that you'll just have to put a little bit more work into it. Okay. And so, because these developmental phases, according to people who study these models, is these are kind of the best periods of life to develop each one of these, but it's not necessarily a fixed thing. So, but where we left off is we were just about to go into adolescence. Um, and and uh, I've mentioned in the class before that really by about the age of 5, we've kind of created a working model of who we want to kind of motivate towards. It probably will change due to life circumstances and stuff, but as I think I mentioned in the class before about the five kiddos attitude towards school at the age of 5 predicts whether or not they'll go to college. It's one of the best predictors of college in the future. And when I say college in the future, I mean from the traditional perspective that you go right out of high school and you go right into college. Okay. Um, but as I mentioned, that's not always fixed. I'll be completely honest. I had a very negative view of school. In fact, I used to have a report card from my second grade teacher that said, "Prepare Curtis for labor work. He probably won't graduate from high school." Um, but as I can, my point being is this doesn't always, these developmental phases don't always predict future occurrences, but they can. Okay. Um, but it is actually during adolescence where we really solidify and come to acceptance of who we are and our identity and whatnot, because there's a difference between adolescence and our earlier childhood and elementary years, is that when we go through puberty, we develop our physical adult body, meaning we're transitioning from a child to an adult physically. Okay. And we come to recognize in some level that we're changing, we're becoming adults, we're becoming more. Okay. And we start to associate more with, for example, less with our parents and more with our identity and our peers. Okay. And to kind of give you an example of this, if you ask a post-pubescent child, someone over the age of 12, who they are, they're more likely to say something like, well, I'm a soccer player, I'm good at baseball, I'm a good friend, I'm this, I'm that. But if you ask someone who is more prepubescent, before puberty, who are you? They're more likely to say, well, I'm Jill and Bob's son from down the street. Okay. Meaning that in childhood, we tend to associate who we are with our family and with what's going on there. And then once we go through puberty, we start to associate with ourselves about our own individual qualities and who we are as a person developing into an adult. Okay. Because of this, Erickson believed that this was the perfect period to develop identity versus a role confusion. Okay. And those who picked C, this is kind of maybe an introduction to some of those conversations that we will have. But what is, for example, uh, healthy identity versus what Erickson referred to as role confusion? Okay. Well, we can draw it out. Okay. William James, who, if you remember, he was the father of American psychology. He wrote the first textbooks in psychology. He was also the first to develop two terms that have been very prevalent in the science of psychology and in popular literature. The first one was self-concept, and in relation to self-concept, use your imagination. I'm just going to put self and an E. Um, for self-esteem, it was William James who coined the term self-esteem. Okay. And what he felt is that our self-concept, as he defined it, was everything that we could say is us, or I should say. Okay. And so that's our self-concept. Our self-esteem is our positive or negative emotion or feeling towards our self-concept. Do we think we're a worthy person or a worthless person? Do I feel good about who I am or do I feel bad about who I am? And that's self-esteem. Okay. Within the self concept, he divided it into two aspects. One is what he called the social self, which is everything that is given to us by our social world. Okay, so we can think there's fixed social identities, and then there's social identities that will change. So fixed identities usually are your gender, ethnicity, race, the fact that you're a son or a daughter, eventually a father or mother, maybe, maybe. If you have siblings, you're a brother or a sister. All of those things that are defined by the social world is your social self. Okay. And then there was another aspect of the self that James argued about. He called it the spiritual self. Today, we more call it your personal identity or your personal self. Your personal self are all of those individual qualities that make you unique and different from the person sitting next to you. So those are, for example, your temperament, how quickly or slowly you emotionally react, your emotional, the way you use your emotions, your personality. Are you introverted or extroverted or somewhere in between? Are you conscientious or less conscientious, open or closed to experience? And what did your personal history really make you who you are. Okay. And that's your personal self. At times, just to kind of get this a little bit more complicated, our social self and sometimes our personal self can linger kind of overlap with each other. Okay. So, for example, if you feel that your gender, being man, woman, non-binary, whatever you identify yourself as, is part of your uniqueness, it's both a social self and a personal self because it holds that value for you. Okay. And you feel that it makes you unique, but also connected to others who hold the same identity or the same sexual orientation or whatever it may be. Okay. Jumping really quick back to the social self, we also have transitionary social self. So we could think of uh, child versus teenager versus 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old. Those are all social selves at that time. Right now in the class, one of your social self is student. Okay. And while I hope you all become lifelong learners, I hope that someday you'll get a degree and go beyond a college student and have your degree and then become a professional in whatever you're seeking with your degree. Some of us are mothers, fathers, grandparents, siblings. All of those things are kind of transient in nature, okay? Because if you think about fathers and mothers, yes, you'll always be a father or mother, but probably someday you will probably transition into a grandfather or a grandmother. And yes, you're still a mother or father, but it takes on a different social identity as a grandparent. So we're always in constant transition with our social selves as well. There are some that stick, some that are usually lifelong, but there are some that change. Okay. So now, what can we say according to the Erickson model and whatnot, and post research that has been done using his model? What's the difference between someone who has a healthy identity versus someone who goes through role confusion? Okay. And what they would argue is that someone with a healthy identity, someone with a healthy identity is someone, I know this sounds weird because of disorders like multi-personality disorder, but I don't want you to think about this. We're not talking about personality, but someone with a healthy identity is someone with multiple identities that they have different aspects of themselves that they focus on. Okay, so let's take someone I don't know. Let's take a adolescent girl. Maybe let's say she's good at she's one of her identity is as I don't know a soccer player. So I'll use SO. Maybe she feels like one of her identities is as a good sister with SI. Will she prides her identity maybe as a daughter. Maybe she's really good at math. Maybe she's extroverted, bringing in the personal self into it. Maybe one of her identities is as a girlfriend. Um, and then we'll just kind of put maybe one or two. I don't know. I can't make anything else up. But these are her identities. So what makes this a healthy identity? Well, if she has healthy self-esteem about them, meaning that she positively evaluates all of these and feels that they're good, then what happens as a protective factor is, let's say we'll take the girlfriend example. What if boyfriend breaks up with her? Well, that's going to kind of ruin or damage her identity as being a good girlfriend or a healthy girlfriend. Okay. But but her self-esteem is not going to be totally diminished because while she works on this aspect of herself, she can remember that she's really talkative and social. She's still really good at math. She's still a really good daughter. She's still a really good sister. And she rocked at the last soccer game. And I still have these one and two qualities. So her self-esteem in this sense is protected, okay? Because she has multiple areas of her life and identity that she focuses on, okay? So then what is role confusion? And I will tell you, role confusion comes in two kind of directions. Okay, and I'm going to draw two circles representing the two types of role confusion. Use your imagination. Okay, and I'm going to draw some arrows in this one to kind of point my view. And I'm going to draw some other arrows in this other type of role confusion. Okay. Now, let's first explain this one. And I'm going to bring up the example of a behavioral health, a college-based behavioral health center that I ran, oh, quite some years ago. It was at another community college, and at this community college, they had on-campus dormitories, all of those kinds of things. They also had a football team, okay? And this football team, because it was a community college in a very rural area, they used a very unique recruitment technique. Okay. Is what they did is they went to A1 and A2 universities, the top-notch universities, and they purposely would recruit really good football players who had been kicked out of the university either to academic reasons or behavioral reasons. Okay. And what made this a unique situation for these football players is because they did mess up at the total potential for maybe the NFL or something like that. They realized that coming to this community college was going to be their last chance either to get back into an A1, A2 university or to get in the NFL. Okay, so this was kind of the last chance for these guys to really make it to the quote unquote big leagues. Okay, and during NFL draft season and the top university draft seasons, I always made sure to keep my schedule a little bit open because there was always some football players who started to engage in high risk behaviors, started to overdrink and overconsume, tended to get violent, especially with intimate partners and creating scenes in public and really just really spiraling down. They'd stop showing up to classes. They would stop doing this. And of course, some even were at the point of suicidal ideation, those kinds of things. And so I'd bring them to my office and I'd say, okay, let's talk about this. What's going on? And the most common response is I didn't get drafted or I didn't get recruited by a university, and this was my last chance. And I always ask, well, okay, so that's not an option for you. What's your plans? And they would often say, I don't have any plans. My whole entire life, from my family to me, has always been that I am a football player. That's going to be my life. That's who I am. That's a person I'm going to be. Okay. This is a version of role confusion where an individual sees themselves in one single identity, in this case, a football player. And once that identity is lost, they are lost. They don't know who they are. They don't know what they're going to do. And they really start to decompensate. And unfortunately, and don't get me wrong, there were some of the football players that did it right. They focused on their academics and all those things, so they had a backup plan. A good number of them had a backup plan, but also there was this set of guys who just simply didn't. They thought that they were going to be a football player the rest of their life, and they never saw beyond that. And unfortunately, a lot of these guys were usually first generational, all those kinds of other dynamics that go into colleges and going to college. And often they wouldn't finish their degree. They'd move back home with mom and dad. Some of the coaches would give me updates on some of them, and they said some of them were so sad because they drove up to their house and they were sitting there smoking and drinking with their dad and just letting their life wither away. Okay, this is role confusion when someone can tie so tightly to a single identity that if any damage occurs to that identity, it can be very, very self destructive for them. Okay. So this is version one of role confusion. Okay. Version two is when you go and ask a teenager, hey, who are you? And they instantly start saying things like, well, I'm not a stoner, I'm not an athlete, I'm not a nerd, I'm not, this, I'm not that, I'm none of those things. And you kind of get ask again. So you're not all of those things. So who are you? And once again, they'll give you the list of everything they're not, but they can't really identify with who they are. Okay. And this is a second version of role confusion. Now, don't get me wrong, every teenager goes through phases when they test out different identities, even these healthy identity individuals, and even to some extent these single identity people, all kind of, go through phases, but these guys often rapidly burn through phases. So, one week they might be goth, and then the second week they might be trying out the whole nerd scene. And then the following week they're trying, and they just really can't find that connection with any of them, because they just can't find it because of, if you remember that right side of the list, they're filled full of shame, doubt, feelings of inferiority, all of those things that they just can't find their identity. This one is predictive of things like turnover rates at work. Individuals with this kind of identity perspective tend to, be the person who says, I can do it better than the manager, or I'm holding out for management positions. The individual who thinks they're smarter than everyone. But then when you ask, okay, so who are you? And then they're kind of like, well, I don't know. That's kind of this individual. They have very difficult times with relationships, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the predictive outcome for role confusion number two. Okay. And again, I just want to remind everyone, we're all somewhere in between all three of these to some extent. I would be willing to bet we have a list of things that we're not. I'd be willing to bet we all have this identity in a singular sense of who we are. Maybe it's your, being Native American or being a male, female. For me, it's being a psychologist is one of my main identities, even though I have several others. So we're all kind of in have a combination of all three of these. But when it gets to the extreme end of especially role confusion, is when we need to start really being careful and look at the potential outcomes of either focusing on a single identity or not developing an identity at all, just knowing what we don't want to be. Okay. So and again, if we chose C, we'll get in much more depth about that and other topics like loneliness and belonging and social connection, all that. But so that's kind of a preview, but that's also from Erickson's perspective. We'll take a different direction when if we choose that topic. I didn't really closely look at the chat, but if that's one of the topics you chose. So that's adolescence. Okay. Now, if you can imagine, if we're more close on the left side of the list, so we've developed trust, a good sense of autonomy, we have initiative, we found value in what we do, and that value has values to others, and we have a well sense understanding of who we are. Again, if nothing changes, no trauma comes into life or anything like that. Again, this is the perfect world. That sets us up well for what Erickson termed as intimacy, being able to engage another person in a intimate, healthy relationship. Okay. And so what is a healthy, intimate relationship, and how do these things kind of support that intimate relationship? In in summary, and this is just pure summary, there are three things that tend to consistently predict. There's others, but these tend to be in every list that we study. There are three qualities of individuals who have been married 30, 40, 50 years, and they're still like intimately in love with each other. I mean, if you put these individuals in an MRI machine, their brain stem will light up just as much as it did when they were first falling in love with each other. Okay. Uh, what's the difference between them and two other categories? People who have been married 20, 30 years and they make good friends and good roommates. So they're together, but that intimate love and intimate relationship satisfaction has kind of waned. And those who have never been able to maintain a healthy relationship. Well, the list is long, can be, it's a laundry list of different things that we find that are common, but there are three things that we tend to find in every list. Okay, and I'll kind of write them over here. Um, I'm going to use the letters ES for what is known as emotional security. Okay. In healthy, intimate relationships, both partners have this thing we call emotional security. And what is emotional security? It is the ability to tell your partner anything without being criticized, made fun of, or them getting upset and angry. Okay, that's perfect emotional security. Okay, this is again way on the left side of the list. That's perfect emotional security. This is the individual who, when a work partner comes up to them and say, you know what, I could never tell my wife this, but, and they tell a story. This is the person that sits and looks at his coworker and goes, why can't you tell your wife that? You should be able to tell your wife anything. Okay. So that's that kind of individual. The second one is what I call the BFF, best friends forever. Okay. And what do I mean by best friend is that, the old saying, a friend is someone who will bail you out of jail. A best friend is the one that is in jail with you. Okay. It kind of goes along that line. But really, what we see behaviorally is that these couples don't necessarily do everything together. For example, if we take a male-female relationship, the woman has girls' night out and the guy has poker night with the guys. They have their own separate things. That maybe they have their own separate careers, all of those kinds of things. But there's something that is unique about these couples is that after having their separate experiences with their separate groups, within about 24 to 48 hours, they re-experience their individual events with each other, meaning that girls' night is not this coveted, the husbands and the boyfriends don't know, and poker night. Yes, I will admit to my wife I lost $500 tonight. It will hurt, but it's something that I can be open with her with, okay? They come and they relive those experiences with each other, okay? Um, and if you could imagine, that takes an incredible amount of trust, okay, on that end. The third one is I'm going to use the letters RF, but it's what's known as role formation. And at its most basic level, role formation is I do what I am good at and enjoy. She does what she's good at and enjoy. And everything we don't like to do, we do together. So, for example, in my household, I tend to enjoy loading the dishwasher and putting wash in the wash. But both me and my wife hate unloading the dishwasher, and we both hate folding the clothes once they're washed and dried. So we do those together. Okay. And there's things that she really likes to do and I don't. One thing is more beyond just chores. I don't really love having intimate conversations when we're out and about. She does. So she takes the social role and I add things here and there. And so that is what's called role formation. Okay. Now, you may ask, the people that we're talking about, they've been married 30, 40, 50 years. They probably came from a more traditional home, meaning that they came from the traditional home where the man is the breadwinner, the king of the house, and the woman was the home caretaker, the take care of the children, take care of the home. And in modern times, it's been argued, well, that's not equality. That's not fair. That's not, the woman's put, quote unquote, as a lower status and the guy is put at a higher status. And this is where these couples would say, stop. No, stop. And this is where the woman would say, I wanted to be a home. Uh, I wanted to be at home. I wanted to take care of children. I wanted to fix my family dinner and take care of them. I wanted a husband who was the breadwinner that went out and did the work and came home. And the man would say, I wanted to be the breadwinner and I wanted a wife who would stay home. That's role formation. It's hard for, I think, a lot of modern couples to really see. But when we look at that other couple, the ones that were just kind of together or the ones who ended up divorced, That's where usually in this research, the traditional man breadwinner, woman home, that's where that they didn't have role formation, we found. We found that in a lot of the divorces for these older individuals, or they were just living together, is because the woman didn't feel appreciated and the man didn't feel like he was the king of his castle, and it just kind of didn't work out for them. Okay. So that is what we would consider maybe an example of healthy intimacy. Okay. Now, what is isolation according to the Erickson model? Again, if we're more on the right side, an extreme right side, we don't trust anyone, we feel shame, doubt, and guilt about what we do, we feel inferior, our identity is really kind of either really fragile or it's non-existent. This really makes relationships look pretty fearful. Okay. And so there's kind of using Erickson's models two trajectories for people who are isolationists. And when I use the term isolation, I don't necessarily mean physical isolation. I mean psychological isolation. Okay. And in one case, we'll just put the number one here. In the first case, these are individuals who dedicate their life to any and put their kind of quote unquote love energy or energy into non-human objects. So this is the proverbial workaholic. This is the person who is completely into non-social types of gaming, for example. This is the stereotypical dog man and cat woman. Because what are they doing in order to avoid intimacy with another human being? They're putting that energy into something else besides another human being. Okay. So that's one. And again, this is according to Erickson's model. What is the second one? The second one is where a person really does want intimate love. They really want to feel love and intimacy and all of those things. Okay. So, what they tend to do is they get in a relationship, and I'll use this kind of graph, and everything goes awesome. Everything's improving, falling in love, everything's cool. And then around about the 3 to 6 month mark, the person dumps this first person, and either they're already communicating with someone else or they immediately get into a relationship with someone else. Okay. Now, what is happening in this case that, according to Erickson and his followers? Well, if you think about when we're courting someone, we don't always we don't always give our true self. We often give the best of who we are. So, for example, on the third, fourth date, and maybe sometimes the first, you go over to the person's house or apartment, and everything is clean. The dishes are done. The bed is made. Everything is very orderly. Okay, sometimes. Um, and but what then starts to happen is you start to go and after a couple weeks, maybe a month, you go over to their place and you notice some dishes are not clean, bed's not made, there's dust and stuff, and maybe a few more weeks you kind of notice that the bed is never made, and those kinds of things. You're sitting together, and one of you lift up a butt cheek and let out a little gas. Maybe one of you burp. And what is happening in this 3 to 6 month period? Well, human beings are not good at holding back all of their human qualities. We can try as hard as we can to be as perfect as long as we can, but those other aspects of us are eventually going to come out. And around the 3 to 6 month is when we get out of fairy tale land, perfect land, and start to get into what's known as real land. The other thing that we tend to maybe find around the 4th or 6th month is you go to your place and you notice there's two toothbrushes in the bathroom. There's one of your dresser drawers might have clothes that don't belong to you. You notice there's another key on your keychain. You're starting to talk about things like money and living arrangements and maybe future families. And this is when not only does the relationship start to be real, now we're starting to look at commitment. That we're, oh my gosh, this is a real and it's going to be a committed thing. Now, I want you to think about how scary this is for someone who has been raised in such a chaotic environment that they have mistrust, they have shame, doubt, and guilt. They don't feel that their skills are worth anything. They don't have a good sense of who they are. Well, this part gets scary, but I want to be in that. I want this feeling. I want this comfort. And so what usually happens is either, start re-uploading Tinder, or I dump that one and immediately start looking for someone else. And so it's kind of this up and down in relationships. Okay. And this is what then is considered the second version of isolation. Someone who truly wants to have a loving, intimate relationship, but because of all of these other issues through their development and through their life experience, there's roadblocks that prevent them from really trying to commit and have that real human connection with another individual. Okay. So that's intimacy and isolation. And it usually is in young adulthood. People always have argued, is young adulthood really about intimate relationships? I mean, people are going to school, they're getting jobs, they're doing this. And I always say, well, if we take the average, let's say 18 to 25-year-old, and this is averages, it's not everyone. Uh, uh, young men tend to think about it every 90 minutes, and young women tend to think about it every 2 to 3 hours. And I will leave it to your imagination what those thoughts are. So if we think that young adulthood is all about developing oneself, getting a job, getting security, well, we just have to look at how often they think about other things. So this is young adulthood, where we're starting to develop our careers, our family, trying to find that person that we can develop with into adulthood and start to develop a family. Okay. Um, so that's that phase. And then we get into middle adulthood, which if you remember our timelines, we really should extend this young adulthood. There's actually a new term that is called emerging adulthood, where emerging adulthood usually occurs between about 18 to 26, 27, and young adulthood, believe it or not, takes over at about 26, 27, and goes up to about 34, 35. And then that's when middle adulthood occurs. But this is, again, Erickson's model, so we'll kind of go with kind of what he said, but kind of keep those things in mind. We have a much longer adolescence into emerging adulthood, into young adulthood. It usually goes from puberty to about the age of 35 before we get into what now is called middle adulthood. So, what can we say about middle adulthood under Erickson's model? This is where he believed we went go through what's known as generivity versus stagnation. And this is where we kind of do one of our first kind of reviews of our life as a whole. And so let's say we have, maybe a 40 or 45-year-old, okay? And he or she, we'll go with he on this one. He thinks back to his life and he thinks, you know what? I'm still on my first marriage. My kids are one kid is about to graduate high school, one is in college. I have a good, steady career. I have a good home, blah, blah, blah. Life has been good to me. And so, because life has been good to me, I should give back to life. Okay. And this is where he coined the term generivity. And yes, back in that day, this is where usually in a middle adulthood, a person starts to enter more civic life. This is where individuals will most likely donate to a nonprofit. They will donate their time to their church or to sitting on city councils, those kinds of things. And Erickson believed it's because of this sense of, I need to give back to life that has given to me. Okay. And then there's stagnation. So if we looked at this from, again, a perspective, a 40, 45-year-old guy sitting there going, you know what, I'm on my third marriage and she just filed for separation. My son's in jail. My daughter is with a loser. I'm on my fifth job. I'm about to be evicted. I'm trying to get really miserable here. What's this person thinking? Life has not been good to me. Um, and therefore, what do I have to give to life? And this is where he termed the word stagnation, meaning the person gets stuck. Okay. Now, there is some positive outcomes for stagnation because, again, just like everything coming in twos and the other phases, one is this is the person that in their late 30s and 40s goes back to college, for example. They commit themselves to, if they have a drinking problem, this is the AA years. This is the where people tend to, if they've had a miserable life, they really go seek spiritual guidance of some kind and really try to work on fixing their life. Okay, that's what is known as positive stagnation. And we should admit, if we look at this from certain perspectives, usually by the age of 52, the majority of men who tend to be violent stop being violent all of a sudden, something about the age of 52. I'm going to say not all. Please don't say, oh, geez, I know a 60-year-old that still beats his wife. Not all men, but a good portion of men who had been violent through their life stop being violent all of a sudden at that certain age. Okay. And we call that positive stagnation because it's just not something that they recognize that works for them. Negative stagnation is probably what most people think as a midlife crisis. This is where an individual tries to go back in time almost to try and figure out what life didn't do for them. So this is kind of that stereotypical midlife crisis of a guy getting a sports car and starts dating 18 to 25 year olds. This is the woman who all of a sudden goes and gets a faceless lift and a breast augmentation and those kinds of things. Okay. So what are they trying to do in this case? They're trying to live something from their past that they felt they missed, that didn't make it so that they were more successful today. So that good young partner or that good car or that that youthful appearance has somehow faded and has lost them. Okay. In these cases, unfortunately, and I'm glad it's actually only a minimal number of us will actually go through a midlife crisis, if that's good news for anyone. Unfortunately, for the ones that do, they tend to wreak havoc in their family. They tend to lose their house, usually end up in bankruptcy, all of those kind of negative things. But there are a few who just realize, hey, I really didn't miss anything. And they go from that negative stagnation to that positive stagnation. So that's kind of the story of middle adulthood, according to Erickson. Now, I would say there has been some controversy about his generativity theory. Because when we look at, for example, when I did training for consultation for nonprofits and fundraising, most all nonprofits want the big corporation donor. They say we need to go canvas the wealthy areas of town. We need to go do this. And I always told them, no, that's not where you're going to start. Okay. Because you're more likely to get a donation from a middle to low income individual than you are from a wealthy individual or a corporation. So so I always said when you're starting your fundraising, start with those who are actually going to support you, which are tend to be the individuals that struggle. And it is true, if we look at the number of individuals in middle to lower income that donate money to nonprofits versus high income or high middle income, it's something like, I believe it's like 48 to 1. For every one wealthy individual that donates to a cause, 48 middle to low income donate to a worthy cause. So this idea of generativity has been challenged, just so that you all know that it tends to be people who struggle, who tend to be well, in this case, a lot more generative than those who have not struggled. So I would say that this component of Erickson's model has been challenged a lot, and has been kind of questioned, just so everyone knows. So now going into late adulthood, one thing that we start to learn, especially as we get older, is holy crap, we are going to die. We go through our child years, adolescence, 20s, 30s, usually even 40s, maybe into the 50s, thinking death is far away. There's a whole entire industry that tries to make that happen. And that we always don't think about, what am I going in our 20s and 30s and 40s, we often don't think about what am I going to leave this world. Um, but by a late adulthood, we've usually lost our parents. We're starting to lose siblings and friends. Some late adult people have lost people who were younger to them, children, adult children, hopefully. Well, not even hopefully, but adult children. That was kind of negative. And we start to kind of like, holy crap, there is an end to this life. There is a defined guarantee I'm not going to be here forever. And we start to learn something about the thing known as immortality. And we start to realize that immortality is less about a physical body immortality, but a psychological and mental immortality, meaning the people that we consider immortal are immortal because we remember them. Okay. So if you think about famous people, that we keep in mind. Martin Luther King as a recent example, to if you're Christian, Jesus Christ. What really kind of make them immortal is they remain in the mind of the people who either believe in them or know about them. And that's what we tend to start to learn as we get into late adulthood. So we go through this other evaluative phase where, according to Erickson, we kind of think back, and uh, person with ego integrity is the person who says, you know what, my family still comes and visits me, my grandchildren love me, I'm still thanked from this thing I did for my work. I made this big change in work that is continuing on. If you're in the helping fields, you know, you still have old clients or something that still say thank you and kind of watch out for you and appreciate you, for example. And you realize, you know what? After I'm gone, I'm going to be remembered. I'm leaving what some call a legacy. And these individuals, according to Erickson, live their life with what's known as ego integrity, meaning that they'll tend to live longer, healthier, more intact, and more cognitively inclined. And they will be those individuals that will die, even if they have a chronic illness, with a sense of pride. I don't want to use the word pride, but a sense of, I did good in this life. Okay. And again, according to Erickson, the person in despair is a person who kids and family don't visit anymore. They're the individual who really didn't make significant changes in the work or in their career. Maybe they're, you know, divorced again and are single. Maybe they, you know, they don't have any friends. They're kind of that person that the neighbor checks in on just to make sure they're checking in on them. And this person, according to Erickson, is the person that lives out their life with despair, meaning that they're going to kind of go on to the other world without really feeling like they really did significant things in their life. This is a person who, when this was explained to me, is a person that shows up to the senior home, puts the couch on the porch, and just sits there and waits for life to end. So, this is Erickson's model. And what I would encourage you to do is really look at it within your life, guys, where you are, and kind of think about these things. Um, because it's never, again, I'm just going to bring this up, it's never too late to change something that you feel that is missing or doesn't or needs to be different, or things that you need to focus more on. It's never too late to do those things. Okay. So that is the third theory. And again, this is the socio-emotional theory. It deals with our relationship with ourself and our world, and what the world informs us of who we are and what emotions and socialness we have. And again, it's one of our first lifetime models. I will just make some adjustments to, again, this lifespan. I said there's actually the sixth place now is what's known as emerging adulthood. And that tends to go from 18 to 25, 25, 26. And then young adulthood goes from about 26 to 30 to, yeah, 36 or so. Um, and then we see from middle adulthood starting around 36 and going to about 65. We see the same thing with late adulthood. We see, I'm going to use the word old. We see that there's distinct periods from about 65 to 72, which we call the young old. These tend to be individuals that tend to be very healthy. They tend to be very vibrant, still engaged. A lot of them may still work. And then about 72 to about 79 here in the United States, our average lifespan is 78, is where we consider what would be called old. This is where, the body starts to break down, physical aspects of our body start to go deteriorate. And then 79 plus, for those who make it beyond the average, is what's known as the old old. What's unique about the old old is these two age groups tend to be combined, meaning that there is no differentiation between young old and old old. It tends to be both. And then after this is when you would see kind of old age start to take in and start to have influence on the individual. So those are kind of some updates to the lifespan from what we're seeing. Again, on averages, every individual is unique in their life cycle. Again, these are just averages that are being mentioned. Okay, so I'm going to